Ray, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I'm excited to dive deeper into contingent workforce and how organizations can leverage this trend to remain competitive. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you, Caesar. Thank you for the invite. Thanks for including me. I'm excited about the topic. I think this is one that I could sit down and just geek out on all day. So this is gonna be fun.
And to kick it off, let's start with how do you get involved into the human resources contingent workforce space? What was it about the space that got your attention?
Great question. In one word, it was my mom. So I'll tell the story, but that's how I got sucked into this life of craziness. My mother worked for Randstad. So as I was kind of growing up through school and coming home on the weekends and coming home for summers and breaks, I would work for her in one of her clients. So work at a production facility or come into the Randstad office and work. So I got to know the industry very well through hearing her talk about, stories and war stories and just things that were happening. Now, keep in mind, this was 30 years ago. So the industry of 30 years ago is night and day. There is no comparison to the industry of today.
Yeah.
But that's how I got introduced to it. When I left college, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I was like, okay, I know this industry. And I left school on like a Saturday and started with Randstad on a Monday. There was all on-site, so vendor on-premise, where Randstad was just standing up this relationship, talking about contingent workforce management. That's what we were doing basically 30 years ago. It wasn't called contingent workforce management, and they brought me in to run this small vendor on-premise north of Atlanta of about 100 customer service help desk type individuals, and that is where I got my start in the industry.
I love the story, especially because it involves your mom being the biggest influence on you.
It's her fault. It's all her fault.
As a dad, I can relate to it because anything that I do, I'm always asking myself, how is this going to influence my daughter? Because you don't know, right? You never know as a dad. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And
she always said, we talk about it briefly these days, but she does not talk about the industry much anymore. But she always said, you need to love what you do. Have fun with what you do, because if you don't, then you spend so much time at work. And of course, that's just amplified as the industry's grown over the last 30 years and, tech and everything like that. You spend so much time at work that you really need to enjoy what you do and love what you do. And, I can say that I really enjoyed the industry. I think there's so much happening, so much movement, so much changing that it's fun. So I'm living true to her words of love what you do.
Yes, love what you do and have fun. I'm 100%. And Ray, how do you define contingent workforce, and what has changed, right, from the time you got started to now? What's been the biggest change that you have witnessed?
Yeah, if you think about when you talk about a contingent worker, and you think about the way SIA would define it, contingent worker is anything kind of outside of that regular or full-time work. So it's a pretty big space, especially these days.
Yeah.
Back in the day, 30 years ago, 27 years ago when I started, contingent worker was really truly a temporary associate, or back in the day, you called them temps. You don't really call it that anymore. I don't necessarily agree with calling a worker a temp. I think they're a contractor, they're a consultant. There's other ways to really elevate that contingent worker. But back then, it was someone who was working part-time, full-time, but it was a traditional, W-2. I have this need. It's either attempt to hire or a long-term or that type of thing. Over the years, fast forward to today, you've seen that contingent space begin to encompass, contractors, freelancers, gig workers. Everything you can possibly imagine kind of fits into that contingent world. Statement of work. I mean, there's so much stuff. It just seems like it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think you've also seen a lot of industry thought leaders and SMEs start to talk about this gig economy and how contingent workers, contingent workforce fits into that gig economy. It's one aspect of the entire gig economy. So you're starting to see that kind of be the term. Not starting, it's been for the last couple of years, but you're starting to see gig really take hold as the way to describe it.
And if I'm an organization, right, and I'm looking at my workforce, what percentage of my workforce should be contingent and what percentage should be, let's say, full-time employees, right?
Yeah.
What would you
Yeah,
recommend? You know, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think it just depends, and I know that's not an answer, but I think it depends on you as the company, and I think it depends on how you utilize contingent workers. You know, I mean, I have seen many companies throughout my career who utilize contingent workers to scale. You know, so as they bring in new projects, let's say it's a production facility, as their sales team, because it's all kind of a process, a workflow, as their sales team signs more contracts and they need to increase production, they're going to need to stand up more lines or increase line capacity. So how do you do that, knowing that, you know, what sales sold was a contract or was a project, bring in a contingent workforce, you know, so kind of layer that in. You can always take your full-time workforce and say, okay, we're just going to put tons of overtime. Well, you're going to burn out your workforce,
right?
And you're spending a lot of money, a tremendous amount of money. So again, kind of subsidize it or scale with that contingent workforce. So I say all that just to say it depends. And it also depends on how do you as an organization, you know, how do you want to create your contingent workforce program? Do you want a certain, this also comes from a past national client that I sold and implemented. Do you want all entry-level positions to come in as a contingent worker? That gives you the flexibility to do a lot of kind of temp to hire or, you know, temp to full-time. Gives you the opportunity to view and work with the contractor. It gives the contractor the opportunity to view and understand you as a company. So there's tons of different ways that you can set up, you know, a contingent workforce program, just depending upon what your needs are. So I don't know that there is, and you know, some folks in legal, some folks in certain places where I think they have different lenses and they're looking at either protection or things like that, they probably would have more of a defined percentage. You know, like if you have this percent, perhaps it gives you some type of coverage or something. I don't know. From my perspective, it's really sitting down with the client, sitting down with the employer and saying, okay, how do you use it today? What do you want it to look like? Let's talk through what makes sense. And then you go back and kind of create and design the program.
What have been some of the other challenges that you have seen from your experience when trying to implement a contingent workforce program? You know, what do organizations get wrong when they're trying to implement this sort of program?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that you see that some organizations struggle with, I won't say get wrong, but they struggle with two things. One is when you don't have executive level buy-in or sponsorship. So if you were to bring in an MSP partner and you launch an MSP program and you don't have executive level sponsors saying, okay, you know, you have to, if you're going to utilize contingent labor, you have to utilize it through the MSP program that we've established. Have that, you still have managers who are going to their favorite supplier and perhaps they're paying, making this up, they're paying 70% markup, whereas the program you get it for 45% markup, because that's part of the nice thing of having programs in place is you can take pricing and make it more favorable for the employer. If you don't have that executive level sponsorship, that's very difficult. that creates a lot of issues within the organization. Change management is another place where it just seems like things go off the rails. Because if you don't have some type of a partner who is really helping to coach you along and helping you to lay out implementation plans, and this is when this should start, and this is when these conversations should start, then the change management becomes extremely difficult. And again, that's where things could just go off the rails in a heartbeat, because you're going to have teams who are pushing back. You're going to have teams who don't understand. You're going to have teams who, again, going back to production, if you have warehouse leadership and production leadership who have always ordered or put in requests for temporary employees who through email or through phone calls, and all of a sudden you're saying you have to use this piece of technology. If you don't train them and really hold them accountable for using that, your whole program is off the rails. So there's a lot of change management that goes into it, and there has to be a lot of accountability.
So change management and buying from leadership can be
sponsorship from leadership. So in other words, hold the organization, hold them to account to say, okay, you have to utilize this program, or you have to utilize these things that we've put in place, and you can't just go rogue, and order things through your traditional ways of getting talent.
Yeah, so there needs to be some sort of like education and making sure that they understand, all the benefits of implementing a contingent workforce program.
Yeah, and you're seeing, just to touch on that just a little further, you're seeing more and more programs as the industry has continued to mature, and as just buyers have continued to mature. You're seeing more and more programs where they're even helping the end clients, buyers, to say, okay, should this be contingent? Should this be statement of work? So they're helping to make sure that everything is classified correctly. That's one of the good things about bringing, say, statement of work into a program, is that you start to put some processes and parameters around it. There's all kinds of different ways you can go with that.
Now, let's say I am a employee, right? And I've been at a company for a couple of years, but I'm slowly getting behind on my skill set, right? Because of the rapid transformation and the digital transformation that's happening like at 10x levels, right? Should I go to my organization and be like, hey, what are the different programs that you have available for me in terms of upskilling, right? Or me as an organization, should I look into a contingent workforce, like a contractor, to bridge that skill gap?
Again, I think because you hear so much these days about upskilling and reskilling and new skilling, and I think you're going to continue to hear a lot about that, because the workforce, especially post-COVID, you're seeing a lot of folks who are not re-entering the workforce for various reasons, or you're seeing a lot of folks who are somewhat, maybe when I say somewhat close to retirement, they were getting closer, and now they're like, what, I'm going to take early retirement, or I'm going to just step out of the workforce for right now. So you're going to continue to see a lot of conversation around reskilling, upskilling, new skilling. I think as an organization, the employer organization should look at everything. I mean, and I say that just to say they really should look at, could a contingent workforce program, or could enhancements made to my contingent workforce program, could it offer me where I'm seeing gaps in my workforce? Could we take certain segments of the workforce who maybe, we see work slowing down for, or we're creating automation for, could we take them and reskill that grouping of the workforce and kind of move them around to where, hey, at that point, I applaud companies like that, because companies like that are investing in their workforce. You know what I mean? Like, if I've given you 10 years and all of a sudden my position is going to be potentially ripped out, okay, are you going to invest money in me to kind of reskill me, to move me around the organization? That's going to make me much more loyal to you as an employer. Situations where you can do that. There are some where you can't. So I guess that's why I say you just need to look at everything and kind of leave everything on the table. And, look immediate term, because there are a lot of companies who have immediate needs. Look more midterm, and then look at the skills of the future. Look at where tech is going, IT is going, and try and figure out, okay, do your top educational institutions, and do they see these tech skills? Are they being taught at a level where they need to be? Or do I, as an employer, need to work to create some of my own and kind of create that workforce out of my current workforce? Again, I say all that just to say everything should be on the table. You should be open to talking about everything when it comes to finding the talent that you're going to need, because it's just going to get harder.
Yeah, have those conversations. And one common thread that I'm picking up from our conversation, it's a lot of introspection, from the organization and from leadership to really know exactly where you're at, where you want to go, what resources do you need, how you're gonna get there. Like I say, if you're not clear on those questions, then you're not gonna get far. Whether it's a contingent workforce program or upskilling, reskilling your workforce. It sounds common sense, right? But in practice, it gets missed a lot for some reason.
Yeah, and I would, I would challenge, the MSPs out there and the folks who are running some of these big contingent workforce programs, even if it's an internally ran in-house program. I would challenge them, and I would challenge the clients who might listen to this podcast. If your MSP or if your in-house program team are not having these conversations and bring these conversations up, then in my opinion, you don't have a true partner. Because the MSPs, the in-house teams, they need to be understanding, reading about, and really understanding what other companies are doing and bringing those thoughts to leadership within their company. If you're an MSP, you should be bringing conversations like that to your quarterly business review, to your mid-year business review, to whatever business review schedule you have. But talking about what are your plans, what are your hiring plans, again, immediate, mid, long term, and how, what are some ideas of how to get there? That's got to be a conversation that's being had, because it's only going to get harder to find this talent. And I mean, I am very involved with, and I think you and I have talked about this in the past, I'm very involved with certain tech platforms who do a lot of stuff around borderless talent and labor mobility. Passion of mine. How do you take workers from other parts of the world and either move them through labor mobility, or be able to say, okay, I don't have to have a worker who sits in the Bay Area. I could have some of the work being done in Europe, wherever it makes sense from a legality perspective, things like that, but really tapping into this international workforce. Companies who I think start to embrace conversations like that are far ahead of their competition who are not.
So why if I'm a leader in an organization, why should I be looking into an international workforce? And what are some of the benefits versus, I guess, let's put it, a local workforce?
And again, I go back to and say this, whether it's on this podcast or whether we're just having a conversation, I believe in keeping everything on the table. I think you should have conversations about every single possibility, and you should try and kind of play out the pros, cons, goods, bads, ups, downs, if whatever, of every single option out there. I bring up borderless talent, international workforces, not to say that they're better than local workforces, but to say in so many situations, so many geographies and skill sets, your local workforce is tapped. So it's like, unless you're going to steal from your neighbor to bring their talent over, and at that point you're going to pay more. So you're starting to change a lot of the dynamics because you have to. Unless you're willing to do that, where are you going to get the people from? Like, that would be my question. And it's a question to kind of really make the company stop and think. Good question.
Mhm.
you know, because you're starting to see more and more employees, especially that knowledge worker, who after post-COVID, which we're not even post-COVID yet, come out of COVID a little bit, you're starting to see them say, okay, I'm not moving for a job. Like
Mm.
I don't have to. I'm not going to, you're not going to relocate me to the Bay Area because I left the Bay Area and I don't want to go back.
Yeah, that's happening a lot.
So yeah, you know, so I just think that you got to look at everything and you got to figure out what works. What's your risk tolerance? What, you know, what is your legal support? There are organizations out there where you can go to them, tech platforms who really focus in on international labor mobility, but you can go to them and say, okay, I have a need for tech workers, the US, or I have a need for tech workers in, let's say, Ireland. Where can I successfully move talent from with kind of the least resistance? So where immigration, work rules, things like that, where does it make sense to try and move them from? And they will help you to pinpoint exactly where within the world you can bring in talent and where has the most talent accessible for the different skill sets and sectors that you need. So, you know, there are companies out there who will help you explore it and you can see if it's for you.
It's perfect segue to innovation in the space. And what besides the trends that you mentioned, you know, borderless talent and hiring, what are some of the other trends that you are excited about, or companies that you are researching, and you know, whether it's in tech or HR platforms? What are some of the trends in tech that you've been diving deeper into?
Yeah, I love, and anybody who has talked to me or seen any of the stuff I've done or any podcast, anything about that, I love marketplaces. Like I just think, and talent marketplaces. A lot of people like really geek out on just the whole marketplace concept, but it is not me. I really geek out on the talent marketplace, the recruitment marketplace. So I think that being able for an employer to be able to go to this marketplace and say, okay, I'm going to put my job out there, I'm going to put my gig out there, I'm going to put my assignment, whatever, put it into this marketplace and let the marketplace, let the community do its thing. Let competition take effect. You know, let people kind of rise up and pick the job that's right for them. So I love that. I love all the talent marketplaces that are coming up. Recruitment marketplace, where you can be a staffing provider and you can say, okay, I am going to be a part of these recruitment marketplaces where I don't really have to invest sales dollars. So if you think about your P&L, I don't really have any sales SG&A per se. I can invest that in my sourcing and recruitment SG&A. To me, that's just brilliant, because sales, and I mean, I grew up in sales, so I'm kind of sitting here hitting myself. Salespeople are expensive, you know what I mean? And if you can figure out a way to, if there's technologies out there who can kind of deliver business to you, and then you just have to really focus on how do I be an incredible sourcing organization, incredible recruiting organization. To me, that's exciting because you're starting to twist the dynamic a bit. I also love how recruitment marketplaces, talent marketplaces, you're starting to see them infused into your very traditional MSP, BMS programs. So you're starting to see a marketplace, so a tech platform, because that's really what a marketplace is it's tech that's connecting. You're starting to see that come into a program, even in the contingent workforce program, come into a program, feed into, let's say, a VMS as a supplier. But really what that means is when the employer pushes that rec into the VMS, it's going to drop to maybe 1,000 recruiters. That's awesome. I mean, that's so cool, because again, you're really turning the traditional MSP program on its head. And there's a lot of people who, you know, probably don't agree with me. They don't like that because they're, you know, they like the way that it's been done for the last, 20, 30 years. But I think if there's ways to improve the process, create efficiency, give the end client access to multiple talent channels, that's what's going to happen in the future for the client to win.
Yeah, that's the future. And with tech and innovation, there's always resistance to change, right? Like it's part of it. But we all know from history that we either adapt or we get left behind, you know, in many instances. So I think it's going to take a lot of people like yourself, right, educating and being an advocate for this type of innovation in this space. Because like I've seen that quite a few times, just from the mindset of, oh no, this is how we've done it, this is how it works, we don't need to change. And that gets in the way of innovation, right? And there's always going to be losers or winners, right? There's always going to be some disruption that is going to create some segment to not be as prepared, I guess. Put it that way.
and that even goes for, I think, from an end client perspective, really end clients being, I won't say set in their ways, but being very traditional in their approach to how they find talent. So that's one. But also you find a lot of MSP partners and DMS partners and just thought leaders within the industry who it's like I think they're intrigued. That's a word I've heard a lot when talking about this, is they're intrigued with, bringing in these different marketplaces into, let's say, VMSs, but they're just, we'll almost like we'll look at that down the road. Okay, well, let me tell you, friend, down the road is here. So if there are, MSPs, VMSs, different platforms who haven't really started to look at this, your competition, they are, and they have. So to your point that you've said a couple of times, you either embrace it and thrive, or, you're going to get left behind. So it's going to be exciting to see what happens. I would say over the next 3 to 5 years, because I think there's a lot of tech that is becoming more and more mature. There's a lot of things like direct sourcing that are, again, becoming much more mature within the North American market. So I think over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see another transformation of the industry. So you're going to see things continue to just evolve. So I think it's going to be fun to watch over the next couple of years.
Now, Ray, I wanna flip it here a little bit, and from the perspective of an individual contributor, let's say I'm someone that is looking to adopt a contingent worker model, right? Like I want to transition from being a full-time employee to contingent worker because of the flexibility and all the other benefits that we mentioned here. What would you recommend to this person? Like, should I go and create accounts on every marketplace out there to get leads for contract work, or how should I take advantage of this trend as an individual worker?
I think there's so many different ways that you can, if you're an individual, if you are kind of a worker or consultant, there's so many different ways that you can engage within the space. You can be you can talk to your staffing organizations, and I'll mention a couple of the global ones just because, your Randstads, your Manpowers, your this or that, all the way, there are regional players, there are local, mom and pop type organizations within your hometown. Reach out to them, because that's going to be typically a very traditional W-2 where you're a contractor, but you're on more of a long-term assignment. Could be a week, could be 6 weeks, could be 6 months, whatever. So that's one way. If you do have the appetite and you do want to look into doing this whole freelance gig kind of thing, go check out some of the different talent marketplaces and talent platforms. There are a lot of platforms out there that at the core, they're online staffing providers. So, they talk about having freelance and gig and this and that, but they're also the ones who are kind of payrolling and backing these workers. So it's more like a staffing type engagement. But yeah, I would say explore all the different options and figure out which one's right for you. There are some great things that come along with the whole gig and freelance and kind of being your own boss, but there's also some things to think about as far as like setting up, like an entity, so having insurance. I mean, there's a lot of things that come along with that, that potentially a lot of end clients are going to require if you're going to do assignments for them. So
you essentially have to adopt the mindset of a business owner.
Especially if you're going to go down that gig freelance. I mean, if you're going to go and do, if you're going to go and work for, again, Adecco, Randstad, Robert Half, that if you're going to do that, then not so much, because you're going to be in this more traditional W-2 type environment where it's what you're accustomed to. If you're going to look at some of this gig work and freelance work and things like that, then yeah, you really do need to think about it from a business perspective and think about, okay, I'm kind of becoming my own company. A lot of that also has to do with, I myself, I own a consulting firm. So, I go out and I work with end companies and service providers and MSPs and HR tech and all these things. But I market myself. I am the marketing department. I am my HR department. I am my payroll department. So it's like you have to really think, okay, do I want this? Do I have the appetite for this? Do I have the risk tolerance for this? As when one project ends or one contract ends, you need to have other things lined up where you can go, and keep working. So a lot to think about if you're going to leave a full-time position. What I think a lot of people are experiencing is coming, we'll say with COVID here, I keep saying that just because I don't think we're through it yet. With COVID here, a lot of people have found themselves in situations where they don't have a choice. Something happened and they've lost their job.
Right.
They lost their job earlier on, and now all the different things with state employment benefits and stuff. They're kind of coming to an inflection point of saying, okay, what am I going to do? I've got to make some decisions. So, it could be the right time for them to say, you know what, I'm going to stick my toe into this new thing and just see where it goes. And for that, I say, Rock, that's awesome. Do it. If you have the ability to do it, go for it. Check it out.
Yeah, I have lots of friends that it was unfortunate, right? They lost their full-time job, but they were forced to become independent contractors, and now they love it, right? Some of them went back to being an employee, but it gave them the opportunity to try it out. But there's so many things to consider, right? As you mentioned, if you're gonna go that route. There was another question I wanted to ask you, but I'm totally blanking out right now. It had to do with in relation to whether if being a full-time employee is like, what's riskier, being an independent contractor, continuing worker, or a full-time employee?
Based on that what you just said, I think that, again, my opinion, being an independent contractor, there are more, I think, risks that come along with it, just because, again, if you're truly out there kind of creating your own projects and kind of creating your own pipeline of things that you're going to be able to bill for, that's a risk. It's great. It's exciting when it's exciting. It's not when it's not. So that's something that you have to be. I take it back to, and I applaud folks who do a lot, but real estate agents, when it's good, it's good. When it's not, it's not. So you have to make sure you're preparing along the way. You have to take up taxes. You have to think about, okay, what if I don't pick up another gig or another project? How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay my mortgage? So you just have to really think about things where you're not getting a regular paycheck every 2 weeks or every month or however traditionally you would get your paycheck. So tons of rewards, and it can be extremely lucrative, but you have to just think downstream, because people aren't taking out taxes for you. So at the end of the year, if you don't, and you haven't talked to an accountant and things like that, the IRS is going to come calling and you're going to get a bill for what normally your employer would have taken out throughout the year. It's just little things like that. Insurance, health benefits, things like that.
Yeah, all those things that you don't have to think about if you are W-2 employee, right?
Yeah. Again, it's exciting. It's and I think so many people are in a situation where they have the option to do something. And I would say, you know what, talk to folks who who maybe are independent contractors or who have started to do different things and really get a lot of different perspectives. Because if it's something that you have interest in looking at, if COVID has taught us nothing over the last 18 to 20 months of life, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, if you have interest in something, if you think you want to do something, go full guns a-blazing, go try it. You can always go back to the traditional way of working, but I mean, God, go for it. So that would be my advice. Didn't ask for it, but I get to.
No, I love it, right? And it's perfect to bring us home. And to do that, I wanted to ask you, what will be your overall message, like your main takeaway that you would like the audience to take from this conversation about contingent workforce? If I'm an organization looking into it, or maybe I'm having challenges with my contingent workforce program, like what will be your overall message to bring it home?
I think it has been, obviously my career has been built around this. I mean, 27 years, this is all is within the space of some sort. To see it change from where it was to where it is and to look forward to where it's going. I just think that there's so much happening. There's so much happening within the space. The space is evolving so much and it's creating so many new jobs and so many new types of jobs. Whereas, you might not have a traditional staffing branch, but you have different jobs that are being created. I would say to employers and folks who either have a program or are looking to program, just be open to everything and really explore every different thing that the industry has to offer of today, because there are so many ways to create a program in traditional staffing, but it takes into account freelance and IC and technology and how can tech help. So just as you're looking at these things, make sure you align yourself either with an organization who is very open-minded and is not necessarily afraid to bring things forward to you, or you work with a consultant who, self-plug, you work with a consultant who is again very open to saying, hey, this is all of it. This is what you have today. This is preferred, you like, you don't like, your risk, all these things. Think about this, research this, look into this, talk to these owners, talk to these tech platforms, and then let's get back together and talk about what you think and see, does the contingent workforce program that you thought you needed and wanted, is that really what's going to be best for you? Did you even know about, making this up, but these other 10 new tech platforms who could do A, B, C, D, and E? You didn't. So like, how does that affect? So just do a lot of research and be very open-minded to everything that the industry has to offer these days.
I love it. And one last thing too, how do you manage to stay on top of your craft? Like, what are some of your go-to either books or publications out there that you frequently go to stay on top of it?
Yeah, there are, within the industry itself, staffing industry analysts, to me, they do a tremendous amount of research. Their team, both here in North America as well as other parts of the world, EMEA, are great. They're really people. There are other industry organizations. Janine, BMSA, does a lot around networking and really helping people to understand the different parts of the ecosystem. There's Talent Partners, which is more right now EMEA based, but I know that they do a lot of stuff globally. It's a great place to go to understand, especially what's happening in the EMEA and APAC markets. And really just, a lot of trying to just stay on top of articles and thought leadership as it comes out around employment, HR tech, borderless talent, labor mobility, trying to stay on top of areas around the world that are having issues with talent they can't necessarily, bring talent in. So how are they going to solve those issues? So those are the big ones that I go to, and then just local news and networking.
Great. And where can people find you, right? What's the best way to reach out to you if I want to get in contact with you about
Absolutely.
Workforce?
So my email is ray@allthingsgig.net. Website www.allthingsgig.net. It's probably the best way to do it. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter. Twitter is Ray Culver MSP. So any way that you can kind of reach out, would love to have a conversation. Would love to, understand more about what people are seeing. So I mean, even if you just wanted to kind of peek out on the industry and see what's working, what's not, love those types of conversations. So yeah, reach out.
Awesome, Ray. We'll make sure to include those links in the show notes. But thank you so much for this insightful conversation on contingent workforce. It's definitely a trend that is here to stay, and organizations need to understand, right, how to leverage it and take advantage of it to remain competitive. So thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us. We really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks, Cesar. I'll talk to you soon.